Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy Research Talks, where we simplify the complex terminologies in research methodology. Today, we will continue from where we stopped in our last discussion, which was how to discover research ideas. We have discussed in the previous segment the process of coming up with quality research ideas. And as we promised that subsequent to coming up with quality research topic, the next thing is to identify your problem statement, writing your problem statement and then linking it up with research questions and research objective. And that is what we are going to be doing today. So without any further delay, let's get into it. So immediately you have a provisional topic like we said in our last discussion. The next thing you want to identify is problem statement. So it's important to know how you can describe this problem that you have seen in your environment or the problems that you have noticed in the record of academic research that have been done in the area you have selected. So the first thing is the problem statement. Writing a problem statement is very important because it is what will describe the issues which you are trying to solve. And secondly, the problem statement would guide you to come up with broad research objectives as well as specific research objectives and research questions. And from research objectives, we come up with research questions. It is important that these three elements are related. So from your provisional topic, you will come up with problem statement. From problem statement, it guides you and leads you to a broad objective, statement of objective. And from objective, you will be guided to research questions. So these three things are not different, even though we call them different names, but ultimately they serve the same purpose for your research. And depending on the type of research you want to do, or I should say, depending on the type of research questions you come up with, in some cases, you might need to also come up with hypotheses. So in today's segment, I might not be explaining too much on hypothesis because we are going to have another segment entirely on what is hypothesis, how do we come up with hypothesis, and what purpose do hypotheses serve in an academic research. So today, we will be focusing more on how do you carve research questions from problem statement. Like we said in our previous segment, identifying problem statement might mean when you do the brief review, okay, you realize that some issues have not been studied in some context that you are interested in, or you discover that the issues that are mentioned in the literature needed to be refined or re-explained or expanded. So whichever may be, or you saw a practical experience in your day-to-day life or in a professional field, and you realize that this situation must be explained, solutions must be provided to the issues you experience. So these are some of the examples of problem that you might come up with, either from the theory or from the practitioner point of view. So when you have this problem, how do you carve research questions out of them? There are two main reasons why it is important to carve straightforward and easily understandable research questions. Number one, research questions will be your guiding light throughout your research. At every stage of that study, you should be able to link whatever you are doing to the questions you have raised. So for example, the type of data you are going to be collecting will be reflected by the type of question you raise, or the method you are going to use, the approach you are going to apply in collecting that data would also be guided by the question. Similarly, the data analysis, don't forget I mentioned that academic research sits on three legs. The first one is theory, data collection, and data analysis. So all these three legs are going to be shaped by the type of questions you raise at the beginning of your study. One of the key important thing that you have to remember when you are carving your research question is the language. So there are some questions that will easily give out the type of answers that will be required. Say, for example, you can create research questions with why, where, what, when, and how. Okay, but from this language, if somebody say what, I can already know that this person is trying to describe. When we use this kind of language, it gives us a reason to describe at the stage of data analysis. So we will be doing our data analysis, and we will be before we get to data analysis, we will be collecting data that tends to describe a situation. Or when we say how, you are looking for reason, or where you are trying to explain the situation where something happened, right? So these are the common question terms that we use in raising questions. So it's important you know the purpose, and that leads me to the second point I think is important to remember. When you have discovered the problem, right, it is important to take a stand and say, do I want to describe or I want to explore? The language of your question can also indicate your approach in terms of, is this research going to explore, or is this research going to provide a descriptive finding, or is this research going to provide a correlational conclusion? So if somebody say, for example, I want to do a correlational study, so it's as simple as saying in your research question there must be at least two variables. And finally, when it comes to writing it down, use the language of why, what, where, and how in relation to the purpose in which that research you want to serve. However, there are people that also use do, another type of questioning language, or is domestic violence connected to psychological well-being? But it is not usually recommended to use do or is, mainly because do questions, do or does or is, tends to require yes or no answers. Okay, so it doesn't really give you opportunity to go deep. That's why it's not usually recommended to use this language. And the second side of the importance of crafting quality research question, like I said, is that it helps you to determine your purpose, and it helps you to determine the type of data you are going to collect and what the type of analysis you are going to be doing when you get to the data analysis stage. So I have some example here. Imagine somebody say, what are the factors that influence knowledge sharing behavior? So you can already see that this person wants to describe these factors, the factors that influence knowledge behavior. So immediately I can suggest that this kind of question can be easily answered by a systematic literature review, because of the way the question have been crafted. Or imagine when you are asked, what are the benefits of knowledge sharing in an organization? In that case, you just have to go look for previous studies on organizational behavior or knowledge management in organizations, because the way you have crafted the question. But let's look at the third type of question, which can mean when somebody asks, to what extent do members of XYZ organization share knowledge? Okay, that means you need to ask the members of that organization. There's no way you can know how a particular knowledge sharing behavior is beneficial to people without asking them. You can't get this kind of answer from literature review. So that's what I mean when I say your question guide you to the type of data you will collect and the type of analysis that you are going to be doing subsequently. And also it's brief, or it gives a clue on the purpose of that study. That's why it's important to be direct and to be specific in how you write your research question. And remember, use the language of what, where, how as relevant as possible And the relevance of this language relates back to the purpose this research is serving. Let's move on. So when you are writing research question, I have some general information that I also want to share with you. We most of the time discourage, especially when you are at the master's or PhD level, you are always discouraged to ask questions that can be answered with literature review, okay, without collecting either primary or secondary data, just by reading literature and collecting previous studies together to answer the questions that you have raised. Is mostly discouraged at the higher level of academic research. However, it is strongly recommended for undergraduate students, if you are doing your final year project, to kind of raise this kind of question, because it helps you to, first of all, have deep understanding of previous studies in that domain, and it also give you an opportunity to see different research designs, how people conduct research in this domain. So there's a lot of benefits for early researchers, people undergraduate level mostly, to raise research questions that can be answered with literature reviews. It's not as simple as just reading and writing what somebody have said or somebody have reported. There are different methods, I should say, in conducting literature review. And I believe in our future discussions, we will also have explanation on how do you do literature review to answer research questions. Also, when writing your research question, focus on the language of how, what, and where, and why. It shouldn't be only what, right? We tend to use what too much. What mostly wants to describe, which is your study is a descriptive study. But when you go down to how and where and why, you tend to be more explanatory or exploratory. So remember that. And finally, when you are doing a quantitative study, the research question should align with your research framework. So what are research framework? I am basically doing this to create the foundation for our next discussion. So in the next discussion, we will be talking more about variables, hypothesis, and framework. So these three things are also important in helping you understand your research and helping readers to understand what the research is all about. When it comes to your research objective, it is important that you start the language of your research objective with to. So when we say, what are the factors that influence knowledge sharing behavior for your research question? So research objective would be to determine the factors that influence knowledge sharing behavior. What is the impact of domestic violence on psychological well-being? That is your question. So your objective will come as to examine or to determine or to investigate the impact of domestic violence on knowledge sharing behavior. I hope that is clear. Also, it is important to develop research objective that fit the framework, okay, because you use your framework to interpret your research objective. I know we've not talked before about frameworks, so I just would leave this here, but when we explain it, I hope you can come back to this and then you understand what I mean by saying your research objective reflecting your framework. Now, ultimately, what I want you to know here is that problem statements leads to research questions. Research questions would lead to research objective. There must not be any form of disparity between these three elements. And when I say that, that also means they should be the same number. So if you have three research questions, you are expected to have 3 research objectives. It's as simple as that. Additionally, you also want to make sure that your objectives are smart objectives. And when we say smart objectives, it means they are specific in terms of mentioning the variables that you want to study. They are measurable. You have to be sure that the variable that you are including in your research questions and objectives, they can be measured. And objectives that are attainable, that are achievable within the limited time or your resources. Resources and time are always limited, as we all know. So don't create objectives that might be too difficult for you to achieve. And I have some example to share more light on this. So I divided these examples into 4 types depending on the purpose of research. So say for example your research is an exploratory study. So remember I said that exploratory study tends to understand phenomena, all right, in order to build theory. So again, that might be another complex terminologies, and that goes against our ambition here. So what is theory? That will be in our next discussion as well. But just remember at this point that when you are doing an exploratory study, you are trying to give a deep and clear and detailed understanding of that issue. And also, exploratory study tend to give a new understanding of certain phenomena. We might have understand the concept in another angle or in another perspective. But when you are doing it again, when you want to study an issue that have been studied in an exploratory research, it might mean that you are trying to contextualize it into some people's opinion or to people's perspective. And in most cases, this kind of research are flexible in the sense that they don't necessarily have to have variables, okay? Or you don't really have to have hypotheses that you are trying to test. And most often, they use small samples of maybe 6, 10, 12, or 20 in some cases. But you do not necessarily have to go big sample. So like we say exploratory study go deep, while correlational and explanatory study, they go wide. So that's the different approach. So a problem statement might look like this, that there has been a surge in the number of suicide committed by domestic violence. Therefore, there's a need to explore the impact of violence on victims. So from this language, from this expression, I can already see how I can carve my research question. So my research question might go something like this. Okay, that's the aim of my study is the purpose of this study is to explore the notion of domestic violence on victims, right? So my research question will go like this: what are the experiences and impact of domestic violence on victims? So you can see it here. Okay, there's a need to explore the impact of domestic violence on victims, and then this guide me to come up with this kind of research question. And then from that, I can figure out what my research objective would be. So research objective will sound like this: to explore the impact of domestic violence on victims. So, but if your purpose is descriptive, so like we said, this describe the prevalent factors in a particular situation. What are the important factors that guide the occurrence of an issue? So they are more structured. When we say structured, might mean you can have hypotheses, you can also have frameworks, okay? And then they use appropriate sample size so that it will allow them to generalize conclusion they come up with and say this particular population, this is the factors that are responsible to or for what they are doing. An example of the problem statement for descriptive study might sound like this. So there has been a mixed report on university students' use of online information. Some reports have shown that students employ online information for different purposes that are not necessarily related to academic need. So that's a problem there. So we don't know what do university students use online information for. Isn't that a problem? So because of that problem, we might have our research objective or research purpose might say the main objective of our research is to examine the extent to which university students employ online information for academic use. We want to be sure, we want to describe to what level do they use academic research for, and do they use online information for academic use. So, and then the question might be, what is the extent to which university students employ online information for academic use? You can see the connection between the objective and the question, and then they are also connected to the problem that we have discovered. So these three things are very important to any academic research. They have to be related. And correlational study, again, they investigate certain issues based on existing theory. They see a theory and they try to confirm if the theory confirm with the reality, or if the reality can be explained by the theory. That's usually the reason why you want to do correlational study. And normally they have a conceptual framework that is guiding the research. That's what I mean by structured when I was talking about descriptive. When you are structured, when you have a framework that you are trying to use to explain a reality, that's structured. You have certain type of variables. We will talk more about framework in our next segment. A problem like this might sound like the effect of brand image on consumer purchase decision have been understudied. So let's say you do some literature review in consumer behavior studies, and you realize they have been explaining consumer decision, how consumer make decision, but maybe not very many of these studies have explained the impact of brand image on why consumers buy product, right? So that's a problem there because few studies are focused on these issues. But notice here that there are two things here. There's a brand image as a concept, and there's consumer purchase decision as another concept. So because we have two issues here, you might create an objective like, say, the research aims at identifying the impact of brand image on consumer purchase decision. So when we say your objective and your question must be specific, it means that you mention the variables that you want to study. So it's easy for anybody that is reading this research to determine that, oh, this particular study is related to these two issues, right? And the question must be related to the objective. And the question of this kind of objective will sound like this: what is the impact of brand image on purchase decision? Okay, so these are the three connections between the three elements. So moving forward, the third type might be explanatory study. Like I said, explanatory is the highest level, right? So it goes deeper to know the why behind the what, not just the what. Correlational might say what's the impact, but when we get to explanatory, we always want to go another level further to see why is it happening, or what is the exact connection. So a problem statement in this regard might say, the example of problem statement I have here is that influencer generated content on social media offer varying values, including informative, entertainment appeals, in order to influence consumers' attitude and purchase decisions. However, that's the problem statement there. Usually start with a however, nonetheless, this kind of negative adjective. Researchers tend to use them when they are trying to. So the trick here is that you kind of narrate the existing knowledge, and then you use some negative adverb immediately after the general knowledge or the fact that you have seen in the literature, right? To say, however, so when we say however, we already know that something is happening there. Or nonetheless, something like that usually helps readers to discover what problem. So when you say however, previous studies have not really delved on the differential roles of different content value. So when you say however, previous studies have not really delved on the differential roles of content values developed by different types of Mr. Famous influencers. So I can already see that that's a problem. Many people have not shown, they have not determined what are the different roles of different types of content that are created by popular people on social media. Okay, so from that problem statement, I can create an objective that sounds like the aim of the research is examining consumers' evaluation, the effect of consumers' evaluation on consumer response to social media content. And similarly, the research questions will conform to it by saying what are the effects of consumers' evaluation of influencers' content on consumers' responses. You see? So these are examples of the connection between research problem, research objective, and research questions. Next, in our next discussion, we'll be talking about how do you create variables out of issues that you meet in your day-to-day experiences. How do you make it variable? Because when it's a variable, it means it might be measurable. And then we're using variables to construct hypotheses and using hypotheses to construct framework. These are the three important things that we are going to be discussing in our next discussion. And I invite you to watch out for that. And also, if you like and you see value in what you have just watched, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, to like our page on Facebook, Easy Research Talks. We are on Facebook, and share and like and comment as well. If you also have any inquiries, you need help, you need support, or you want to ask any question, or you have an input in any of the things that we have discussed, you can also write us at easyresearchtalks@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and see you in our next video. Goodbye.